Yay Networks.
Hi, Wild Ones. Welcome back to the Wild Rose podcast. I'm Whitney Rose.
And I'm Connie Daniels.
So, Cons, I missed you at the Wild Rose beauty event the other day.
I
was hoping
know.
you could make it.
I know. It looked like it turned out absolutely beautiful.
It was so amazing. It was really hot, like temperature, but I didn't really get permission to do it in the neighborhood. I kind of just popped up and did it.
Yeah.
So I did this picnic. I'll tell you, it was like an influencer's dream, this pop-up picnic here in Daybreak on the beach. And it was to bring influencers and bloggers together to promote Wild Rose Beauty. And I invited Connie, but she has family in town and she has a lot going on. But
I was really sad to miss that one.
it was
So cute.
It was a lot of fun. Like I met a lot of amazing women that I haven't met before. The picnic was amazing. The food was amazing. But the best part was it was as if Daybreak is an attraction. People come here to walk, ride bikes, feed the ducks, It was like no one had ever seen a picnic before.
Well, that wasn't just a picnic. That wasn't like throw out the blanket and bring a little basket of goodies. This was not a regular picnic.
We did have umbrellas, champagne wall, charcuterie board. We had a table that fit 30 people, and the chairs were like pillows.
Yeah, the
and
cute little
puffs.
cushions and stuff. Cushions to sit on. So cute.
You could head to my Wild Rose Beauty page to see the photos, but I'm just like doing my thing, and I'm like, why? It's like the world had never seen a pop-up picnic like that. So people were like coming by, taking videos of photos, asking me like for my business card. I'm like, oh, I don't do this. This is picnics, like pop-up picnic up Salt Lake. Like it was like, is this a wedding? Is it a birthday party? It got a lot of exposure.
Yeah, I can imagine people just stopping and gawking. I would have been like, what is going on out here? It's gorgeous.
And one guy, he was like trying to join, and
he was trying to join.
Yeah, he grabbed a glass of champagne off the champagne wall.
Shut up.
And I was just like, hey, this is a private event, but yeah, enjoy that glass. Let me put it in a plastic for you because we're not really supposed to be having glass out here, and I'm trying to make sure the Daybreak police don't come. So,
help yourself, honey.
I'm selling myself out right now. So he takes the glass of champagne, and he just wanted to chit chat, and I'm like, hey, I'm hosting this event. This is my, and like, then he dives more into it. And I'm like, hey, bro, this is a girls' night. Like, you're crashing it.
People are so funny. You're like, hello.
And then
Whitney, you're so nice.
I know. And then he's like going for another one because then we switch to rosé. And I'm like, no, sir, like, I'm sorry. Let me make this very clear. This is a private event for my business. Yeah. These are all influencers and bloggers. I'm glad you're having an amazing time, but come back in an hour and you can chat with everyone.
Oh my gosh. That kills me.
But me, I can't say no.
I know. You're literally the nicest human ever.
So finally I was like, bro, you gotta leave.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so funny.
Today we have a really cool guest. Her name is Allie Cates. Allie actually found us in our podcast through, really I think just us talking about healing, spirituality, all of the things. And I've noticed something I don't really share a lot is that since I've been open about my quest for healing and all of the different things that I've done is like all of the people that reach out to me, like I really took a step back and realized that I've been able to connect with thousands and thousands and thousands of people who, we're all different, come from different places, but have similar experiences. And like that has been one of the most rewarding things for me, just sharing my story and doing this podcast, like sharing on Instagram, on the podcast, all of the things, like the people that it's connected me to, and really realizing that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you look like. We all go through similar things in life and we're connected and we have each other. And just the power of sharing your story can really help someone else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think, that's how we found and met Allie Cates. And she is an emotional health coach. She has an incredible story. She's been through a lot of trauma, a lot of grief, a lot of pain, and she has really used that to fuel her business in coaching people to get through their trauma and their healing. And she has amazing techniques and insights and tips. So we're excited to have Allie on today.
I'm so excited to meet Allie.
So let's take a little break, and when we come back from the break, we'll talk with Allie Cates.
Welcome, Allie. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Obviously, healing, trauma, all of the things are near and dear to my heart and Connie's heart. We talk about it a lot and share our journeys through navigating traumatic experiences and things that we've been through. So we're excited to have you on today. I know that we have a lot of really great questions for you. So I'll let Connie take the lead here.
Yeah. And, trauma and those things, none of us are above that. Like every single person on this planet is going to go through something that's hard and traumatic. And dealing with your emotions and figuring out how to navigate through that is often very, very difficult. And I know we all do it in different ways. And so it's really nice to have some people who are trained to help us through those experiences and those emotions so that we can live a more fulfilled life once again.
Well, and Allie, I went to your website and I was reading a little bit about your story and getting to know you more. And you have been through a lot. And I would love to just kind of start from the beginning, like who you are, how you got into this work, just whatever you're willing to share, like your background.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, I just want to say too, Connie, it's such a good point is that I always say trauma doesn't discriminate. And that's you can kind of tell in my story when I talk about that. But so my story begins at 22. My husband and I lose 3 people in 9.5 months. And these deaths brought up a lot of my repressed childhood trauma that I had shoved down and saved for a rainy day and really just disassociated from. And I went on a healing quest. I tried everything. I tried EMDR, I tried CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, hypnotherapy, breath work. I kind of just threw everything at the wall and was like, what's going to work? What's going to help? And when I was going to therapy and specifically talk therapy, they were like, you're scrappy, you get it, you're doing all these techniques. But I just felt like my body was still holding on to something from just a young age. And I was like, I still feel like the way I describe it is it feels like my skin was crawling. I can't really describe it any other way than that. And people that have been through trauma, and specifically childhood trauma, know exactly what I'm talking about. They're like, your skin feels like it's crawling. And so I remember I was at my lowest point this one day. My husband came home from work and I was like, we have to go for a bike ride because I am having suicidal ideation. I just need to get out of the house. And so we go for a bike ride and I called a gentleman that I had seen in town and he had it said trauma on it. I'm like, well, maybe this is what I have, right? I'm at kind of a last ditch effort. And he calls me and he's like, what's going on? I'm like, this is what's happening. I feel like everything that I've shoved down is coming back. I'm spinning out. I'm spiraling. I'm having suicidal thoughts. And he's like, I've been doing this for 40 years and I work with veterans specifically. And you're not going to believe me, but this is called trauma and it happens to everyday civilians. And I'm like, no, there's no way. Right. So then kind of fast forward, I'm in intense trauma recovery with him. We're doing the body work piece of it, myofascial technique. You're releasing a lot. It's very intense. And I'm 3.5 years into intense trauma recovery. And then I have all these memories from childhood, really intense childhood trauma memories come up and flood me. And at the same time, my health just crashed. So 3 weeks before I got married, I got diagnosed with late stage Lyme and a couple other autoimmune conditions. And got back from a honeymoon, sat in an IV room, and I knew enough about trauma that I knew that when trauma is not resolved, it comes out physically, whether that's IBS, autoimmune disease, cancer. And I was dealing with, a significant amount of them. So I sat in this IV room and I was like, okay, this is breaking me down. Like whatever you believe in, higher powers, like I was like on my good days, I knew that this was breaking me down to build me back up into the person I was meant to be. And, to tell you the truth, I never thought I was going to be in trauma recovery. You couldn't have paid me enough to be like, you're going to be in this space, helping these people in this really hard time and around mental health. But I went to college to be, Erin Andrews, like the girl on the sidelines, like talking to the cute football players.
Yeah.
Like that's what I went to college for. Is I wanted to
like
be the
sports
next
broadcasting.
Yeah. I wanted to be the next Erin Andrews. And so I always tell people it's like, I do this because it's out of like my own experience. And my goal is just to help people realize that like, they don't have to give up on themselves, like that their mental health and specifically trauma, like when it's that overwhelming, like I promise there's a way through. So my coaching practice was really born out of the Ivy room of like sitting there and talking to people and coping with what was coming up with in my own body as well.
Wow. Isn't that interesting how sometimes in our head we have this idea of where life's going to take us and we have our goals and our dreams, and then life experiences changes our direction. But I feel like it kind of like something inside of you, your soul, it guides you that way, whether you want it or not. Like it will pull you in that direction, which sounds like what has definitely happened here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and especially when you disassociate, like my personal experience was, I always knew that there was something there. I knew that there was things that I remembered and probably things that I didn't. But the things that I remembered alone were horrific. And it's like I'd already talked about them, acknowledged them, and thought I had moved on from them. But it was a similar thing. I kept struggling. My health was breaking down. My hair was falling out, was breaking off. I was in and out of the doctor for my gut. I was having colon problems, esophageal problems. I have autoimmune diseases. And it was like nothing was correcting my physical ailments. And that's when I started tapping into like emotional work. It really connected the dots. And I love what you said because it's so true, because emotion is stored in the body and that emotion turns into disease. And disease, it's when your body is expressing like, help me, it's screaming at you. That's when it's like already, it's not too late, but it's like, okay, listen to your body because it is telling you to look inward. And there's a root cause of everything, right? I was taking all these medications, but my colon wasn't getting better. It wasn't until I released the energy and I do myofascia release as well. Like once I released it, they were diagnosing me with Crohn's and it got lessened to just
sensitivity?
it's
like
not,
IBS.
Yeah, like diverticulitis. Yeah, just an infection of the colon, right? So I literally watched as I worked through it physically and emotionally, my body healing itself.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like our bodies are so smart. Like when you give them the space to heal, they want to heal. Like your body's always seeking homeostasis, right? It's always looking to be in rest and digest, not in fight or flight. But like we override our body so much with business, with work, with obligations, with kids, like with dinner, with all of the things. We're like, no, I can't listen to my body right now. Maybe later, maybe when this thing happens. And then it's like, eventually your body's like, no, F you. It's going to happen today. And like, you're going to be bedridden in the couch, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you add trauma on top of all of those other just life things that are happening. And then it really is going to scream at you.
Well, yeah, when you've stuffed it down and you've disassociated, or maybe things that, because the childhood brain, that's a self defense mechanism to forget because it's too hard to understand and process what's happening or what has happened. Like your brain only has capacity to store it for so long. So as you grow, I don't know how old you are. You don't have to share, but I know a lot of...
I'm 30.
A lot of 30s. I was going to say a lot of the women, a lot of the people I've talked to since I've shared a little bit about my story and my healing journey, it's the 30s because life has happened. Stress has happened. You can no longer... Your brain has to be occupied by other things, other stressors, so it comes out.
Because you're living, like you're surviving, and you're surviving the only way that you know how to, which is to disassociate. Your brain's like, okay, well, this tiger is still chasing me, right? So then you're gonna like disassociate and just be like, I'm just gonna keep running because that's what I know is like the norm is to just keep running. And, it's so interesting you talk about that too, because I think a lot of people, for me, it's like I went into trauma recovery knowing that there was sexual abuse there, right? So like at 15, I was raped, lost my virginity, and I was like, that's my big trauma. But after I worked through that, it was like there was more sexual trauma from my past that was coming up in a very big way. And it was like what you were saying, like too mortifying or too like shameful to talk about, that I was like, oh my goodness, I can't even tell this to the practitioner that I'm working with because I have so much shame around it. And that's what trauma does, is it keeps you wanting to hide and feel shameful instead of like actually release it.
Absolutely. It holds you in that victim stance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
yeah.
So you've talked a lot about like therapy and different things that you've tried. Connie and I both do therapy. We're fans of therapy, but we're also big fans of other modalities as well. Talk to us a little bit more about like some of the other things that you coach people or you recommend, like different healing modalities. Because therapy, talk therapy is great, and I've heard you say like that it's great, but it kind of misses the mark on some of the things. So dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I mean, talk therapy is excellent. Like, it's really good at validating what's going on. It's good to like, process what's coming up and feel that validation. But talk therapy is a top-down approach. So you're bringing the brain on first, right? And so you're moving down. When you're working with like somatics or trauma, you have to use a body up or what's called like a bottom up approach, right? So you have to bring the body online first. So I always tell people, I'm like, if you could out-talk your trauma, we would all be healed, because like we're all spiraling in our heads when you have trauma, right? So I always say that. And so we have to bring the body online, because the body is a thing that holds trauma, right? You guys are both moms, and right? You guys both have kids.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone has ever told you this. And whenever I say this to moms, they always like really resonate with it. But like when you were giving birth, you like, from what I understand, I don't have kids, but you start shaking, like your body starts shaking, right?
Yeah.
And if no one's told you about that, you're going to freak out and be like, oh my God, what's happening? My body's shaking. Or it's similar if you're coming.
No, I had C-section, so I didn't experience that, but I'm just kidding.
I had both vaginally, one with an epidural, one without. So I had no idea what was happening.
What was happening? Yeah.
No, you just go to your appointments for 9 months and go to the delivery room.
Right.
Like, it's like you're shopping at Louis Vuitton. You're just waiting for your order to come in.
Women's health is like a whole nother topic that I can talk about, but it's like just insane. But it's similar if you're coming out of like a surgery and you'll start shaking too. And typically the doctors will put medicine in you and they'll be like, okay, we'll help you stop the shaking. But what the shaking is it's actually your body discharging from the trauma that it just went through.
Oh wow.
So after my C-section, I remember I had to sit in a room for 30 minutes, couldn't hold the baby or anything. And I shook like crazy. So, okay, I never really, I knew it was because of the medication, but like,
well, they
also
probably
the trauma
put like warm blankets on you to try to calm you down. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like, even
but
just
my teeth were chattering.
Yeah.
I was like, ugh.
Yeah. But that's actually your body's way of naturally releasing. So if you look at like animals in the wild and how they don't get traumatized, it's because they actually let their bodies go through this release, is what we call this discharge of emotional pain. So they don't store it and then it doesn't become trauma.
Yeah. That's just a natural thing for animals. But because we're in our heads a lot, we don't let ourselves do that. Is that what you're saying?
Or society is like, oh my God, that's so weird. Don't do that. Right? Like, oh, we need to shut it down. Yeah. So getting back to your point, Whitney, about like what I help clients do is like, I use somatic experiencing, which is a tool that I use with clients, which is around just helping them discharge that emotional pain. We also do body work, like the myofascial, releasing the emotions, like in a very big way. People are like screaming and getting anger out. Like that's a big part of it, is like actually releasing that stuck anger, which a lot of women have.
Will you explain just a little bit what is myofascia? I've seen this type of thing happen. I've never heard it called. So I don't know exactly what it is.
Wait, I want to throw out a funny quote. Haven't you ever heard your issues are in your tissues?
Yes. Yes. Your issues are in your tissues.
Yeah. So myofascial is like you have fascia in your body, right? Like in the tissue. And your fascia tissue can hold up to 1,000 pounds of emotional charge.
Oh, wow.
So when you actually like, have you ever like gone to like gotten a massage or done yoga or went for a run and you like start crying and it's like old and you're like, why am I crying right now? Like you're questioning it and the tears feel old. Like that's because you're tapping into this old charge that's in your body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Like even on a really simple level, like if you have a chronic pain somewhere, like your neck or gut, like anywhere, have you ever been scraped?
Yes.
Like,
and it hurts
and
so bad.
it's like, or even just stretching like your hips or something, you'll be like angry, mad, uncomfortable. Like you just feel all of those emotions.
Yep. Yeah. It brings up a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You're like, yeah.
That's, But your fascia though, it's like what's around the muscle, right? And the skin, it's like in between the skin and the muscle. So it's like, and it holds 1,000 pounds of charge.
Yeah. Yeah. There's research on this that it holds up to 1,000 pounds of emotional charge.
So when you're feeling overwhelmed and like heavy, that's why you physically feel it.
Yeah. I mean, you feel it like when you feel anxiety, where's the first place that you feel it?
Right here for me.
Yeah. It's always chest or stomach, right? We don't feel it in our head. And so that's why I always tell people is like when you're working with the emotional charge and stuff, it's such a body response. Like we can't outthink it. So yeah, when you're feeling that, or like people have stress patternings in their body, right? Like for me, it's like my right shoulder, like scapula area, or my like right hip is,
right here.
Or like the back of the hip. Yeah, I'm always like, I know exactly what this is about and like I need to release it. But most of the times we'll be like, okay, I'm just going to either like use an unhealthy coping technique or I'm going to try to like use a tool that doesn't necessarily release the charge all the way, right?
Wow.
Yeah, for sure. Like, so explain to everyone what the myofascia release is.
Yeah. So it's like you're manipulating the tissue to help like move. It's so hard to put into words, but essentially like you're manipulating the tissue to help your body rework itself back to homeostasis. So let me kind of give you an example for people that are like, Allie, I don't know what the F you're talking about. Can you break it down? So are you guys visual learners? Because I'll give you kind of like a visual and this might help you.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, okay. So I'm going to draw like a circle at the top. So typically what happens when you have trauma is this is called a stress cycle or a trauma cycle. So at the top, you have a trigger, right? Then you go into fight or flight. Then you have a discharge and then you go into rest and digest. So most of us go from trigger to fight or flight, trigger to fight or flight. And when you do that, it builds this emotional charge because you're not completing that full cycle, right? So let's imagine that there's a rabbit out in the woods. I always use this example because for all my visual learners, they love this. But like, let's say there's a rabbit out in the woods and it's just like munching along on some grass. And then it hears like a break, like a branch break. And it looks over and it's a coyote. So it goes into fight or flight. It runs off and then it hides and it's like eventually feels safe. And then it does some type of discharging, right? It's either shaking or it's, doing different things to discharge. And then it will kind of hop off and it'll go into a place of rest and digest. So this is why animals out in the wild don't get traumatized, is because they actually complete this full cycle. And there's research on this. Peter Levine's a great person to read his book called Waking the Tiger. And he brought this work to trauma recovery around like, how do you release this charge in the body, right? So there's different techniques to do it. And I bring that up because when people are like, what are you talking about? Like, what's an emotional charge? That's whenever I give that example, people are like, oh, I get that. So when you're doing myofascial technique, you're trying to actually complete that full stress cycle and let that discharge happen at the bottom, right? So when you're getting into the tissue, you're letting that old discharge actually occur. So that's why people will like have anger. They might want to like punch something. They might want to like cry or scream or say no or whatever's coming up, is because that charge that never happened when the trauma happened, it never got released, right? So then you're like releasing it later on.
And this is the step that not many people get to or even understand or even know it's possible to do. So this is important stuff.
Well, because for the most part, we're taught that, whether it be sexual abuse or just trauma from an experience of feeling abandoned or not heard or, like there's all levels of trauma. Like we're taught that you kind of just stuff it in, especially if the trauma was like you were threatened, like don't tell anyone. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like there's all different levels, but even something that keeps coming up for me is different words that people use when they speak to me bring something up for me. And that's a simple trauma, but it's because I always stuffed it in. I never like went there to be like, wait, why does that really offend me or hurt me? You know, it's because I feel like you're abandoning me.
That's good mindfulness. Yeah.
But I think, Connie, like just long way to answer your question. Me personally, I'm not the expert Allie is. I'm a practitioner. I do a lot of this work on myself.
I love it.
But yeah, I had to survive. Like I got to a point where I couldn't keep going. Like there was no way I had to face it. But it's because I think we were just not taught. Like it's like the trauma happens, we go into flight or fight. We either run away from it or we battle it. But then we never like are told what to do after that.
Right.
And most people too, like when you talk to people that have gone through trauma, like for me, do you guys watch Yellowstone?
I love Yellowstone.
Oh my God. So I always say like I'm Beth Dutton when I am triggered because I just go into fight with my words. Like I can literally drop you with my words. Thank God I didn't go into law school or anything. But like most people are just like, oh, well, that's just the way I am. Like I'm just kind of a bitch, or I'm just kind of like I act this way, or I need to respond this way. But really it's like this old unprocessed emotion that hasn't been released. So then every time someone says something to you, you're like exploding. And that's trauma, right? Like you're bringing the past into the present and then you're reenacting it in the present like it's happening. But it's not happening. So Whitney, when you're talking about like, oh, someone says something to me that way and I feel abandoned, it's like, that's trauma, right? You're trying to you're trying to work through it in the present, being like, oh, I have all these tools now. But that's the thing is like trauma will completely, your trauma brain is not rational. So it's like trying to tell you to work through it. And you're like, wait, this isn't giving me the result that I think it's going to get me.
Yeah. I remember listening to, I can't remember who it was. I'll have to come back to it. I don't want to embarrass myself and quote the wrong doctor, but they say that trauma, your body doesn't know the difference metaphysically between when the trauma happened and when you're reliving it. So when it comes up for you and you get that response, fast heart rate, stomach hurting, whatever it is for you, your body doesn't really understand if it's the trauma or if you're reliving it. And that's why it's so important you call it discharging it, right? Like to release it. Because it has that same, like you said, your brain doesn't really know the difference.
Right. So it feels like it's happening, even though in your head, you're like, it's not happening, but I'm feeling like it's happening.
Yeah, but you're feeling like it's happening all over again. Your central nervous system starts freaking out and everything wreaks havoc again.
Yeah. And like your thinking brain goes offline. So when you get triggered, your actual like cognitive brain goes offline and you go into your reptilian brain, which is just like, I have to survive. So whatever I have to do to survive, if that's I have to fight with my words, I have to freeze, I have to run, like I have to people please, which is also a trauma response. We call that fawning, right? Like a little doe, like fawn. So it's like whatever you have to do to survive, like that's what you're going to do.
It's just making me think. I've been thinking a lot about my grandfather. He just turned 98 and he was in World War II. Whitney's grandfather is still alive too. Was also in World War II, which is kind of crazy that they're still with us.
Well, my grandpa that was in the war, he passed.
Oh,
but my grandpa's still alive and you're same grandpa's age.
Okay. No, but this is very much stuff that back then, even men in and women in Vietnam, and they would go through these very traumatic things, but have to just shove it down, come back to real world and shove it down. They have all this PTSD going on and they didn't have tools for so long. I mean, my grandfather, when he was 18, now, I mean, he's 98. It's like he had to live with that for his whole life. He's just now talking about his ship that got torpedoed and that he has survivor's guilt. Like his whole life. He just lived with it, didn't talk about it, came back, went to work, and it's crazy, that whole generation. And like, it's just so helpful now to have like tools and people like you to help us navigate and get things out, and that we don't have to live in this fight or flight the rest of our lives, or lash out because we don't understand our emotion that's been stuck with us for however long,
Yeah. I think, Connie, too, you bring up a good point, which is that like, we don't talk about this a lot, but like epigenetics, right? Is that like trauma can be transferred down through lineages, right? So like if your grandparents were in, like my grandma was in the Great Depression. So then like that trauma from that, I'm like, why do I feel this way, or what's coming up? And it's like epigenetics. Like when you have trauma, it changes your DNA. So like that gets transferred down to the person below you, and then that gets transferred. Right. So it's like we do inherit certain traumas that people are like, oh my God, why do I have money scarcity? Or why am I scared of like driving in a car, or whatever the thing is? And you can like trace it back to people that have gone through trauma before you in your lineage.
Absolutely. One of the healers that I used to work with, we did a lot of generational work.
And healing.
Yeah. And understanding, like, I think the biggest thing is recognizing the trigger so that you can move through the process of it, right? Because I found out, because there's a quote, hurt people, right? And my biggest goal was just to break some cycles that were inherited in my family. Come to find out they were generational, like way back. And a lot of just limited belief problems, like self-worth, money problems, abuse, all of that, addiction. It goes all the way back. It's imprinted in our DNA.
Yeah.
But you can't change it unless you're aware, right?
But where does
first up is awareness.
Yeah. So like along that line, it's like where do you start? Like maybe someone who's like, okay, I wasn't, we all have trauma. If you're living, breathing, you've gone through something traumatic. It's life, right? So like where do people start? I know that you have like a really cool approach to mental health, like your 101, like 3 tools for women. Like what do you recommend? Like where does someone start in this work?
I would say, I always say this, I know it sounds really basic, but like the first thing is just like acknowledging your emotions. Like what's coming up? Is this anger? Is this fear? Is this sadness? Is this resentment? Like what is the thing that's coming up? And that is oftentimes the hardest thing for people. The second is to like name where you're feeling that in your body. So that's my second approach to it. Like I'm a very body-based practitioner because that is where I have found a tremendous amount of results. That's where I see my clients find a lot of results. So it's like naming that. Okay, I feel really angry. Where does that live? In my jaw. Okay. Like, and then just recognizing where that is. And it's similar to a trigger. Like, okay, I hold a lot of anger in my jaw. Like a lot of women are like, oh, I'm getting Botox for my TMJ. I'm like, if you actually release the charge from your jaw, you wouldn't need to get the Botox for your TMJ because the TMJ would actually go away.
Wow.
So it's like when we can have that connection to where it is in our body, like that's huge. So just noticing, okay, what's the emotion first? And then where it does it live in my body? And then the last thing is like learning the tools to help you move out of fight or flight. So like learning how to regulate your nervous system. And that can be done in like a whole host of different ways. But I would just say like finding a couple of tools. Maybe that's like swaying. Like this is a good kind of nervous system regulation. It's like you'll see people just kind of like sway back and forth. Just like if you're standing in the grocery line and you're just like kind of like slowly swaying back and forth. Or just like finding something that you can get into your body. So like there's a pressure point between your thumb and your index finger. If you just like push on that pressure point and like recognize like, okay, I'm in my body, right? Like and it's similar to like the cognitive behavioral thing, which is like, what are the 3 things I can see, 3 things that I can smell, and 3 things that I can hear, right? Helping you drop back into your body is the last thing I would say.
Yeah, those are really helpful.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's like, it seems so simple,
basic.
but when your brain turns off, you're like not even aware that you're not in your body. You're floating.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so out here. That's the thing is like I lived, and I'm sure you can, you probably resonate with this, is like you live so out here when you have childhood trauma that you're like, it's actually really scary and frightening to live in your body because you've been so disconnected from it and so disassociated from it and glazed over.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that feeling like because you had to. That's how you learned how to cope and survive. And I love this conversation because I've been struggling I've just been really busy, but like I've had anxiety, like really bad anxiety over the last couple of days. And it's like these basic practices that I keep forgetting. I'm like, I'm out of my body. I need to get back in. And so I love this conversation right now because it's a constant practice.
It's constant. Well, and I think too is like when you get overwhelmed with like work and life and all the things that you're doing, it's like sometimes those things don't fit the way that they used to. So like when you're used to going in fight or flight, you're like, oh my gosh, like my thing is like I wore like the busy badge of honor. Like I'm really good under stress, right? Like that, like my thing that I would just be like, I'm really good under stress. And then after I started to regulate my nervous system, I'm like, actually, I hate being stressed, but like I still have to like live in this space because I'm running a business and have a life and et cetera, right? So it's like coming back to those grounding practices. Like I think that's such a good example, Whitney, is like, even if it is overwhelming, just like coming back to those grounding practices of like, okay, I need 5 minutes in the morning before I can pour into anyone else to pour into myself first.
Hey everyone, our chat with Allie was so great that we split it into 2 parts. So come back next week and hear us talk about grief. Until then, be you, stay wild.
Yay Networks.